All right, so welcome to Primavera's Biology Lesson 23 on climate change. So many people don't realize climate is not the same as weather. What is the difference? Weather is a state of the atmosphere at a given time and place, a specific time and place. So in Arizona, the weather would be windy and 212 degrees. In the valley, I guess. It's measured in terms of temperature, rainfall, humidity, cloudiness, whereas climate is the average weather over a long period of time, usually around 30 years. And if you're watching the news, you'll see they'll say this day in history we had this temperature and this today we have this one. And we're below average, we're above average, that type of thing. Weather can change several times a day, whereas the climate normally takes a long time to change. So, what is climate change? It's a natural phenomenon, normally takes place over several centuries, and it's being used now, that term is used now to refer to the current climate because recent scientific records show that the global climate seems to be warming up more rapidly than usual. So the average global temperature has increased 0.6 degrees Celsius in 140 years. The 10 hottest years for the last 100 years have occurred since 1990, and scientists have predicted the climate could increase by up to 6 degrees Celsius in the next 150 years. All right, so what impacts might climate change have? So nature, habitat destruction, climate change could cause habitats to change faster than animals can adapt. Polar bears are one species that could be at risk from extinction. Extreme weather. So in 2005, New Orleans was hit by Hurricane Katrina, one of the most powerful hurricanes ever. And we're seeing a lot of those extreme weather even today. There's was it Hurricane Matthew over on the East Coast? Really bad. I don't think it's doing a lot of damage to Florida, but it's doing damage to the states a little bit north of that. You've also got rising sea temperatures, so you can have more hurricanes and you can lose fish life. I mean, there's so many changes. It's, ridiculous. So for example, if you're losing fish, what if the algae then increase in that area? Then you've got a whole nother event going on as well. Heat waves. In the European heat wave of 2003, over 20,000 people died. They don't have air conditioning, or they didn't at the time. As a rule, air conditioning is not something they use. Even though a milder climate might be pleasant, heat waves can be a real problem. Food, so changes to farming. Warmer weather has increased the length of the growing season, so you could get more food out of it. That's good. But tropical areas could suffer from more droughts and famine because of more sun and less rain. Pests, hotter temperatures allow pests like mosquitoes to live longer or produce longer. So they can spread disease like malaria. Oh gosh, I just forgot the other one that affects the horses. West Nile, sorry. And mosquitoes and insects that are insects that carry malaria, so they can also travel further north as it becomes warmer. Also doesn't help if the predators that normally feed on the mosquitoes diminish as well. So, destruction of coral reefs. One of the issues is the change in water temperature by 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. Coral reef ecosystems are very delicate, not just being able to photosynthesize, but again, feeding other animals, sheltering other animals, For example, this is really kind of a freaky example. Australia's Great Barrier Reef could lose 95% of its species. It is currently a protected reef. Sports. So more higher temperature, decreased snowfalls, also does rain, but in this case we're talking about affecting skiing, snowboarding, so it affects the livelihood of places that survive based on the skiing and snowboarding seasons. And so they may even have to close sooner or not open. We've had that happen in Arizona up north as well. And that's why one of the places up north, ski resorts, has gone to making snow. So, some of the things we have to do. There we go. What is global warming? So the term global warming is often used in connection with climate change. But remember that global warming and climate change are not the same thing, even though they're often used interchangeably. Okay, so global warming refers to the increase in the Earth's temperature due to that greenhouse effect, which can cause changes in climate. So I used Phoenix as an example. So we've got all this concrete, blacktop, rocks, all of those absorb the heat. Well, because of the pollution, the heat can't be released into the atmosphere like it used to. So the ground stays hotter. Then the next day when the sun comes in, the ground is already hot, so that sun adding that temperature in makes the ground even hotter than before, and it's a vicious cycle. Although, kind of cool, there was a professor at ASU that created rubberized asphalt. So he was taking all the tires, breaking them down, and creating this new asphalt. This new asphalt not only lowers the noise of the freeways. So some of you might remember back in the day when the freeways were super noisy, they're trying to cover as many of the freeways as they can with this stuff. But it also releases heat faster. So they did a study on the I-17 and they found that it was 10 degrees cooler than the freeway sections that did not have rubberized asphalt. So one thing we are doing though is using the term global warming to refer to the warming predicted to occur as a result of increased emissions of the greenhouse gases. And again, it can lead to significant climate change. So why is carbon dioxide so important? Well, it's considered the most significant greenhouse gas, although I would argue that nitrogen is a little more important. Nitrous oxide. This is because carbon dioxide can remain in the environment for a long time, anywhere from 50 to 200 years. Now we do have carbon sinks that hold carbon, but if we've got too much carbon being created, the different ways that the earth stores the carbon will become saturated. They won't be able to absorb any more, and so then you've got all this extra carbon, again, causing greenhouse change. Any process producing carbon dioxide today could affect the climate for hundreds of years. Carbon, though, is present in all living things, moves through the environment in the carbon cycle, which I think is briefly touched on as well in the course. So levels of carbon dioxide have increased since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So relate that back to the peppered moths and the coal industry that came in, and the birch trees went from white to black, and how it affected the peppered moth population. And think about how human activities might have contributed to this. So here's a little one on the carbon life cycle and how it's important. So carbon is in the atmosphere and the ocean as CO2. Plants take up the atmospheric carbon dioxide when they photosynthesize. They store the carbon as sugars, which are eaten by the animals. Plants and animals will release the carbon dioxide during respiration, so exhaling. And then it's also released by dead matter as it decays. Sediments from dead matter can form the fossil fuels and carbon-based rocks. Burning the fossil fuel releases more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Volcanoes also release carbon dioxide from the Earth's core into the atmosphere. So you've got all this volcanic activity going on. And that's it. Those are some ways that carbon dioxide's released. So when fossil fuels are burned, they're carbon-based materials. They're formed over millions of years from plants and animals. They're burned to generate heat, which creates carbon dioxide and water as waste products. So fossil fuels plus oxygen equals CO2 plus H2O. Greater use of fossil fuels is thought to be the main source for this increase in the atmospheric carbon dioxide. So something for you to think about. Should the use of fossil fuels be limited? And how would this affect our lifestyles? What else affects greenhouse gas levels? So if we burn wood, we release CO2 into the air. So Maricopa County has no burn days because of this. There's too many pollutants and things like that in the air. So you kind of need to follow the no burn days. Living trees also have a major impact on the atmosphere. They produce oxygen, they absorb carbon dioxide, but by deforestation, so removing trees, reduces the amount of photosynthesis that can take place. So then you have an even larger increase in carbon dioxide levels. So rice farming, cattle farming also produce greenhouse gas called methane. Cows, okay, so here's a little farming information. Cows, currently they have the cows swallow this metal rod that's a magnet. They feed them food. They feed them grains, and they feed them parts of other cows that have been ground up, which is how we're getting some of the transmission of the mad cow disease to other cows. Of course, we haven't had a incident in that recently. So then this magnet catches all the crap that's in their food, and when they are being slaughtered, then that's removed. Now they have found, and so the cows produce a ton of methane gas as they're releasing it. Now they found that cows that eat grain, the ones that are treated, because cows are really vegetarian, so they shouldn't be eating other parts of cows that are left over. If you feed them their ideal diet, grain only, they don't need the magnet, and they produce a lot less methane. So I think it's kind of cool. Methane is 7.5 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than CO2, but is currently in the atmosphere at much lower levels. So they don't worry about that. Climate change. How can it be prevented? So, so careful with them cows. Methane, one of the greenhouse gases, is produced by livestock flatulence. Research is being carried out to see if changing the food animals eat reduces flatulence, which I mentioned. Road transport accounts for nearly 25% of the emissions. Walking, cycling, and using public transportation would help lower this. Governments can act together to prevent this. 161 countries worldwide have committed to the Kyoto Protocol, which is an agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The flags used in the background of this picture represent Madagascar, Japan, Thailand, the UK, Ireland, Iceland, Argentina, Italy, South Africa, Netherlands, and India. These are the people that have agreed to it. The USA has not signed the Kyoto Agreement, and that's kind of an interesting thing if you want to read. So you can just Google Kyoto Protocol, KYOTO, and that'll tell you a lot. Air travel is a major polluter. One short flight produces roughly the same amount of greenhouse gases as running a small car for 3 months. Oh my goodness. Should air travel be restricted? So my question here, though, is they carry whatever, 100 people to a destination in an hour. How much gas, honestly, or how much greenhouse pollution can 100 people driving to whatever, the one that's an hour flight, but it's an 8-hour drive, actually produce? Because you can't send 100 people in one car. So you've got 100 people in a bunch of cars driving 8 hours. Interesting idea. Trees take up carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, so planting the trees will help with that. And you can also, as a business or an individual, pay to have trees planted. Businesses definitely like to use this to help offset the emissions. Also, if we make machinery and cars more energy efficient, it will help reduce the amount of fuel needed. And then switch it off or wrap it up. Insulating homes would decrease heat loss and wasted electricity, which we do, but you got to make sure you have enough insulation. The insulation goes away after a while or is reduced. Switching off electrical appliances and lights also saves electricity. It also keeps your house cooler. And that is it for this presentation. If you have any questions, give me a call. I am happy to answer them.